Welcome to Surviving Saturday, a podcast about holding on to hope in the midst of life's difficulties, disappointments, and dark seasons.
Times like that remind us of the agony and despair the followers of Jesus felt on the Saturday of Easter weekend, in between the Friday on which he was crucified and the Sunday on which he rose from the dead.
That Sunday forever changed the way that humans can relate to God. But what does it look like to be honest about the very real pain we experience in the in-between?
To fervently cling to hope in the God who promised us his peace and his presence, at times when he feels distant or even cruel.
I'm Wendy Osborne, a licensed counselor in Charlotte, North Carolina.
And I'm her husband, Chris, a marriage mediator, conflict resolution coach, and trauma-informed storywork coach.
Join us each episode for authentic conversations about how life not turning out as we'd expected has created the contextual soil for the growth of a tenacious hope in the resurrection and in a God who is still making all things new. One of the parts of the book I'm going to read that just was so touching to me, and I don't remember which of the four of you wrote it, but it was a joint effort, so it's your thought regardless, I'm sure. Y'all wrote, "Your marriage is where redemption is meant to grow. God intends for it to not merely be good or happy, but transformative. You will become who your marriage exposes and invites you to be. This is a far richer and more compelling vision of marriage than only getting along or resolving conflict through compromise. You are either becoming more like Jesus together and because of each other, or you are not." And so that to me is just a flashing billboard of what are we doing. And so I would love to hear y'all speak to what's that been like for y'all to either usher one another into the heart of God and becoming more like him or not.
Yeah, the first thing I think of is being willing to bring my whole self, into the marriage. Whereas I think maybe when you first meet and you're first dating and then you're first married, you're just trying to bring your best parts, right? And you're trying to ignore and pretend like the other parts don't exist and hope that they don't come out, and you're just thinking, I'm going to do really good. I'm just going to try really hard. And so we get attached to that. We get attached to being that false self where it looks really good. And then these parts just keep nagging at us. And I think there's been this, I don't know at what point it happened. It's been a process, but where we've begun to just open up to like, we have a whole self and there's beauty and there's brokenness, and it's all there and you have it too. And I can't point the finger at you and you can't point the finger at me. And as far as being image bearers, like sometimes that feels overwhelming. And sometimes that just feels like, thank God, because I can't do it. It's not in my own strength. It's not in my own gifting, but it's like, it's part of who we are, and like claiming I'm beautiful and broken and you're beautiful and broken, and we're going to accept it all. And I think if we take a lot of energy trying to keep the bad parts from coming out or from having a bad response or whatever, but when we can embrace that and go, you know what, it's part of my family, it's part of my heritage, it's part of being human. And then I think that also is a shame diffuser when we can begin to receive that. And that's, to me, where redemption begun to take root for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like what you read. It's when somebody reflects what we wrote. It reminds me of maybe a moment or two, or where we are, the computer we were in front of, or the environment around us. So when you read those words, I'm almost back to that moment of what it was like to write words together with Dan and Becky and Lisa. And I think redemption, for me and for us, it is a profound privilege to be in a relationship where that's even potentially possible. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the highlights in what you just read. It shifts the trajectory of our marriage if we allow that to be the potential hope. I have wrestled for years in my own family, but also at times early on in our marriage where I felt like I wasn't enough. I felt like at times the who I wasn't really what Lisa was drawn to. that it was more about my production, fulfilling needs, etc. And what I have discovered, which is just catches me off guard, often is that Lisa's love for me is not about what I do, and I at times can't make sense of that. That Lisa's attunement, her love, her movement toward me is about the who of me rather than the what of me. And that to me is what I think we are so in love with, both with each other and in our faith with Jesus, is that there's a unconditionality of who I am, the love for who I am versus what I do. And that, I think, has dramatically shifted the way we engage, the way we relate, particularly over the last maybe 2 to 3 years.
Well, and I would say I feel like Wendy and I've been beneficiaries of that, of you all sharing that generously, and really, I would say at the workshops with you and Allenders, that shifting of the trajectory has really happened and taken root. In that, we, as you all describe, you can be the agent of redemption. You can be the face of God to the other,
Yeah.
and the face that brings delight and brings, I am for you, I see you, I'm with you. Talk about this dynamic. For us, at least, it felt like we weren't really, I don't know if we weren't able or we couldn't quite grasp that in terms of giving that kindness and care to one another until we really each did a fair amount of individual healing.
Yes.
Where we actually had to go on deep journeys in sort of into our own story and have people help us learn how to give kindness to ourselves. And so I wonder if you could speak to sort of that interplay of doing your own work individually and when and if you can, trying to come together. And everybody may not have it on the same trajectory and timetable. We didn't always either. But speak to that dynamic, the individual and the couple dynamic.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking when Steve was talking, that as he was saying he felt more loved. I think that there's also this interplay between, he had more compassion and love for himself, and I had it for myself as well. And that's why I think, because you have to be able to receive it. And if you're filled up with shame and you are trying to be, an Enneagram 3, and you're just trying to achieve, and you're just all about productivity, and you aren't, it's so hard to see your value. And we get so stuck in those categories. But when we can have a compassion and an empathy toward our own selves and our kindness toward our own stories and understanding them and how they've shaped us, we're more of a receptive vessel to the other. Because if you're not a receptive vessel, it doesn't matter how round and round you go about whatever it is that you're trying to convince the other of, you're not able to receive it. And so it's such a process. But then also, when you say go and do your individual work, I think sometimes that also can't be done alone, because we draw each other into that. We listen to each other's stories. We ask more questions. What was that like? How was that? And so there is a part that we also play for the other to be able to sink down into those stories and remember what our bodies experienced and what we felt like. And so it is something that we've done together. And so it's hard to say exactly where the line is drawn. But
I think for us, and from the way you guys have spoken to in your own story, and for lots of couples, that's really helpful to pursue some individual, like what we reference as story work or therapeutic work or some form of exploration that isn't necessarily the responsibility of the spouse or partner. And I think that's been really helpful for us. And we both have been in a different context for that, different journey. But I love what you said, Lisa. What did you say? The receptive, what was that phrase you just used?
Receptive vessel.
A receptive vessel. It's a really beautiful phrase of how we're honored to receive what the other has to offer when we've allowed ourselves the kindness and care to explore, what is my resistance about? What is my shame about? What is this unaddressed trauma that's been unnamed or unspoken or hasn't been revealed? And so I think that's been a significant part for us, is we've been willing to open the door, the closet door, to what we wanted to be hidden, what we didn't want to be seen.
Yes.
And as risky and as crazy and as freaking overwhelming as that has been, I think it's been worth it.
Oh, I just want to say, I feel like it got triggered today, even because I wasn't a receptive vessel today. We went for a walk, and I realized it was colder than it was, and I'm going to run back and get my hat. And Steve was like, "Well, you should have got your hat." And then I felt like, "Oh, okay, fine. I don't need my hat," And I was and he's like, "No, it's okay. Go ahead." The dog jumped on it. Just like this thing happened, And I got all like, "Okay, fine. I'm not going to go get it," And I just was like that little part of me that rises up. So one of my things was being right and doing the right thing and feeling like I have to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden that got triggered here today, and I was like, "No, I'm not going to do it." And he was like, "No, go get your hat," And I was just like,
Right.
I had a little war inside of me. It was so simple, but then I'm like, fine. I went to get my hat. And I realized he's saying this in kindness, but it still rises up,
Right.
just it's in there.
Well, I was thinking, as you said, Steve, it crystallized something for me. Because when I was referring to like individual work, I mean, in a sense, we've had to go, and individually, we've been in a group where we've processed stories of trauma. And what hit me as you were describing that is one of the benefits of doing that. I'm in a room full of 7 people, like in an NFTC training group or something. And the people who are there don't bring anything. They bring their own stories, but they're not Wendy, and they're not bringing, our story. There's something I think was helpful for each of us in the freedom just to process our own story of pain and harm and the effects of that in the presence of other people who could give that care and that kindness, because they're not going to be married to me 2 days and 3 days and 10 weeks, later. Right. And so there's no pressure. There's no, you have to, this is in the dynamic of, well, yeah, but how are we doing life, here and there. There's something about the group dynamic that was super helpful. Other people could care for me in a way that Wendy couldn't, not because she's not a brilliant and in fact gifted caregiver, because she is, but our wounds are so timed and set up to land on each other's that we couldn't go into deeper places with each other, even though we're pretty attuned people and the heart was there, but we couldn't go there because our stuff is in the room also. We go into these group contexts and it gets worked out, and other people are bringing that care pure and not with, this is how this is going to affect a relationship. And there's something healing about that. And then we learn, and then we can come back, and that has enabled us to have more curiosity conversations with other people. And you don't have to convince the other person, because at least 5 or 6 other people have said, I see your pain and I'm with you. And so it kind of lets you settle into yourself, like, you may or may not see it right now, but I know it's there. I'm not making this up that I feel this way. Does that capture it somehow?
Yeah.
So we're wondering if you all would speak to kind of how you envision people, what are the different ways that couples might use this book, and ways to explore some of this material, talking about how you get curious about each other's story, but also how you create safety and how you create a different environment, a different kind of conversation. Kind of speak to that a little bit, ways that can happen.
Yeah. One of the things that came out of the writing, we didn't really envision this, but about halfway through in the writing of the book, we were invited to consider what we just call the companion guide. And the companion guide is, I think, this resource that individuals can use, and also groups can use, couples can use, maybe in a marriage story group or other forms of group. But it really is it's an invitation for couples and for individuals to utilize some of the material from the book. One of the things that is so key, I would just say foundational, in how people might work with the material that we've offered, is pace. We in the companion guide, we write it that it would be something that couples or individuals would go through maybe over 3 to 4 months. That it's not something that we just sit down and read in a 1 or 2 day setting, but it's something to metabolize over time. That's an important feature of safety. When you ask that, Chris, that safety comes through structure, safety comes through consistency, safety comes through reflection. And so one of our hopes in both the book and the companion guide is that couples would use it as a space and place of reflection. They might read a chapter, they might read a few pages, and then we come back and reflect. What are you aware of? A takeaway. What do you notice? Anything that you felt or anything that you experienced? And so there's I would just say there's a wide range of possibility in how readers can engage. But one of our hopes is that it both touches their own marriage, but it also touches those around them. That couples would invite others into this, what we call story work, around paying attention to how does your past play literally a part in the present that we're often not aware of.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say a little bit more for people who are unfamiliar with a marriage story group, what you mean by that?
Mm. Yeah, these started for us when after our first marriage story intensive, where we had 8 couples come in for 3 days, we started offering as a follow-up these marriage story groups for couples that were part of the intensive. And really, I think our hope is if we were to fast forward, I think that's the hope of a lot of what we're doing in the present. It's that couples would invite 2 to 3 to 4 other couples to a group setting, to a group experience, where each couple has an hour or so to just share a particular story that occurred maybe over the last month or two. And it is meant to be a place of reflection, that the other couples get the privilege, the honor to speak into what they notice, what they might be aware of, maybe where this couple that's sharing feels particularly stuck in a particular conflict, that the voices and the faces of others reminds that couple that they're not alone in the journey. And if we were to say what is one primary takeaway, and even for Lisa and I in a marriage story group, it's really that we are reminded that we're not alone. And I think for most couples, that's often the sorrow, the heartache, is it feels like at times we're alone in this. Nobody gets it. Nobody's with us. And so if we want to use the word community, we can, but I think it's more than that. It's literally exposure to what we are careful to reveal. And yet in the context of being known, I think that's where the safety comes, and also the validation of our struggle.
Yeah, I was thinking about the word safety and in the ministry that we've been a part of and in the book. And I think part of that safety is inviting like couples, inviting them to come as they are, like that there's not this ideal or this perfect, or we're not going to get to a certain level of, oh, now you've arrived in your marriage. That's not the focus at all. And I think what creates safety is like what you're saying, that, hey, we fight too. Oh, hey, we had a problem too. Like there's this isolation that
Yes.
couples get into because we just, especially I think in the church, where what are you going to say? How are you guys doing? We're fine. We're great. And so there's not a lot of places to say, we're really struggling. Like, this is really hard work. And that's what we, in the very beginning, had hoped to create, because we realized that's what's real. That's what's actually happening. And we don't have this high standard of what it should look like. We're just saying, this is what it is. And it's a struggle. And so the safety, I think, is where you gather together and you maybe gather around this book and go, we're telling you stories of how it's really hard and how we've struggled, and how can we embrace what's really actually there. And I think that's, again, the beauty of the story work, is it's actually data. It's not
Yes.
something you can change. It's not something you can, go back and give you the shiny version. Like, it is what it is. And so now what do we do? And it feels really real, which feels safe. I think there's just not a lot of areas in our life where we can go and be real and create that safety with others and have that containment of going, we're going to take each other for where we're at.
Well, I had two quick thoughts in response to that. One is we've all seen where when couples do become, oftentimes a couple, one person can see the unhealthy dynamics in the other's family before they can. And what can happen if you do it that way, it becomes weaponized. It becomes, oh, here you go,
Mm-hmm.
being your dad again. You don't want to be that loser. We've heard
Mm-hmm.
people, speak to that. And so that's one thing I'd say, story is going to come up. It's just, if you're not doing it in a purposeful way and giving it containers, it's going to come up in a weaponized way, which does harm and damage. And you have to be really careful how you wield this stuff. But the other thing I was thinking as you were talking, we should emphasize that you also, in the book, and you guys in your work with us, you've also emphasized there's a positive aspect of story as well. And I love how y'all emphasize the stories. Also tell the stories that drew you together. Also tell the stories that how you noticed each other and what was different about them, because there is something of the goodness of God in that. It's not, ha ha, you got suckered into marrying this person who's going to trigger you all the time. Ha ha ha, it's evil. It's God is able to know there was goodness that drew you together also. And that's a source of hope. But you speak to that as well. I was going to get your thoughts.
Well, what came up for me as y'all were talking is you kept using the word safety. And I think that's essential if you're going to venture into this territory, to let Jesus work in your marriage. Because I think a lot of times as believers, we sort of create a context for like the Christian marriage Olympics. And it's like, look at how good mine is, or we used to struggle, but now we don't.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's easy to pigeonhole each other as the ones with the hard marriage. And that's not God honoring or growth provoking. And so I feel like, we want to be and are blessed to be on the journey with people who also want Jesus to be redeeming themselves, each other, and their marriage. And when you're in that kind of company, there's nothing you have to show off about Jesus. Like, you're just putting yourself under his good hands and encouraging each other to not be threatened by the need for that. So I just always say it's not just community, but safe community, where people will fight for you and not look down on you. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, Wendy. I think that's just so essential, is that that we have an advocate, yes, in Jesus himself, but also in the face and the body of the other, that is meant to be the safe one, the safe experience. And so am I known? Am I seen? Am I loved for who I am rather than, what I produce? Is there judgment toward me for what I'm not? I think that's the heartache and the struggle for so many of us, but also for so many couples that are in that maybe darker place.
Yeah. And it's just messy. It's messy. It's complex whenever we gather together with anybody. So we're not here to say, oh, and you're going to find these great groups and you're going to gather together and everybody's going to be safe. No, it's very complex.
Yeah.
And it's messy. And so I think we're broken. And then that Jesus works in that. And there's beauty and.
Yeah, I was going to speak to how just what you and Dan have really cultivated and what's been inspired us is the honesty about the broken, while still holding the hope of the delight of what we're meant for. And you had defined, I think in the book, there's a place where you describe what delight is and how it's more than mere happiness or optimism or positivity. It comes from a gratitude founded in a sense of wonder. It's a childlike joy in the beauty of a moment that surprises us with goodness. And yet you named the dynamic that we sometimes want to deny, that we want that we need it. And we don't even want to let ourselves hope that's possible. And I would say that's one thing that working with you guys and the elders has sort of awakened in us 31 years into the marriage. There's sort of been a reawakening of a sense of delight, of playfulness. Like, wait a minute, this can be fun as much as it can be maddening, as much as Dan says it can be a taste of hell if we let it go that direction. But it can actually, there's been moments of joy where we feel like we actually are. At one point, I'm like, how can you get more intimate? What do you mean? We've made love, we've had children, we've been in the hospital together. How much more? But there always is more intimacy. There's something more, and that feels both encouraging. It makes it also feel less daunting, less like I got to work on my marriage, which feels like this.
Yeah, I that word delight has been, I think, again, an area for us that has grown tremendously over the last couple of years. It wasn't necessarily a word that we integrated or used in teaching or in writing, but I wrote about this in one of the chapters where Lisa and I went to a favorite beach that we love to go to, and there's a cliff on the side of the beach, and Lisa loves to climb, and and she just scampers up this 30-foot cliff, and I'm watching her from the bottom. And if she could have seen my face, if you could see my face, it was one of just pure joy, but also pure delight. And I think that captures what we invite both ourselves, readers, others, is where are you captured? What captures you? Where do you find delight? What is it that it maybe seems so ordinary to you and maybe isn't? But I love that paradigm that we're in, that yes, brokenness, but where's their beauty? Where's their delight? Where's their goodness? And that is something I think that our eyes have become more open to, more in the recent past than early on. But I think that's our hope for readers, is that something of delight would be recaptured, would be remembered, would be re-experienced.
And I think that's how we bring the face of God to one another.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that idea of deep delight.
Yeah.
Like, you know, the quote I read earlier about God has more in mind than just you get along well, or you fight fairly, or you compromise appropriately, but more these deeper things of like, do you delight and have a sense of awe and wonder for each other? Because that's a part of the arc of redemption.
Mm-hmm. And I don't want to keep hammering on the story work, but I really do, actually, because I don't know anything like, sure, you're going to maybe hone your tools, you're going to fight better and all that, but there is nothing like being known for some of the very tender places of our, our young selves, that when somebody understands and goes, oh my goodness, that's what happened to you, or that's what you experienced, or there's such tenderness and delight in being known in those very, very young, tender places. I just think that's the intimacy that we're talking about. It's not, okay, we're going to do this work so that we can, we can do better, whatever. But there's just something that touches our soul. And I know, even couples that haven't been like, quote unquote, attracted to each other anymore, there hasn't been, sexual intimacy or whatever, but then there's something that gets activated when there's a tenderness for the other in some of these stories of hurt. It almost seems counterintuitive, but there's something when you feel so known and so cared for, in this way that you'd never even think to tell some of these stories because you were 5 years old, or you were 4, or whatever, you were 7, you were 13. But then when the other attunes to that and can really come close to you and come near, and there's that young delight, I don't know, I just can't, there's nothing like that. And the way that it blossoms in a marriage.
Well, I think, you also, I mean, I know I've caught myself more, and I've felt it more from Wendy also, knowing the stories of where we come from better when we see each other like really leaning into living into our goodness. We were more able to say, I saw what you just did, and I know where you came from, and you weren't set up. Everything in your family story was not to give or not to hope or not to risk, and you just did, and it was gorgeous. It was beautiful because it didn't just, that's not just how y'all rolled. The way that like the relationship you've cultivated with our kids is tremendous. It's a showing up in a way that is really powerful. Things like that. And you sort of see, you can start to see the other as more of a, they're actually, not, oh my gosh, they failed again, they're not doing this. It's like, wait a minute, look what they overcame and look what they did. And there's this sort of changing spirit of, you can do more. I want you. I want the best in you, despite where you've been. Am I capturing it right?
Yeah,
I
mean,
speak to it?
I think it's like watching evil lose its stronghold, and just watching the talons fall out of. It's not going to have the last word. Yeah.
I feel like you defined the word awe, which is such a hard word to define, but it feels like awe when you see that and you think, wow.
Yeah.
Well, and that's a word we've denigrated sort of, back in the 80s when awesome became like the word cool, everything is awesome. It's awesome. It's like, well, not everything can be awesome. It kind of robs it of the meaning. Awe-inspiring should be reserved, for majestic things.
Love that.
Well, we're at a close, but I just want to thank y'all again for spending time with us. And I'd love it if you'd let people know some of your upcoming offerings and also how they would connect with you if they would like to.
Thanks for that, Wendy and Chris. It's been a delight to be with you
it's been
guys.
so fun to be here.
We can be found on the website. It's called the Reconnect Institute. That's where our offerings are, where resources are. So that's the best place to find us. We're also on Instagram at Reconnect Marriage. That's another way that people can access some of what we offer.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the book comes out. Is it right? The book is out on January 21st?
Yeah, 21st. So a week from Tuesday. Yes, just about a week away.
Yep.
So available for pre-order, and then it is released on the 21st. So,
And we'll be in Utah
in
February 7th and 8th if, there's a marriage conference there. And then we have our intensives coming up, one in April and in July and then next September. So you can look that up on the website as well.
Well, we'll put a big plug in for the intensive. You all create such a welcoming atmosphere with the barn, the food. If you've listeners ever been to a conference where you just kind of get serviceable food and it's like a cafeteria.
It's not that.
When you're going to do the story work, you guys it's important to have some good food. To have there was also some of our fondest memories of being on your back porch outside the barn there are some of the laughter, some of the stories that were told. And as we were getting to know people's stories of how they met each other, I remember some just uproarious,
we like to have fun,
as well as people going with each other into hard places. And there's just something about other people being able to see what you can't see in terms of goodness and delight and challenge. You all created a great environment for that. We are the beneficiaries, and we're grateful and hope you all are able to do it much and often.
Thank you. Those are really kind words. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Take good care, guys.
Thank y'all so much.
Okay, great
so good to be with you guys.
Yeah, grateful for you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The Surviving Saturday podcast is brought to you by Nurture Counseling PLLC, a counseling, teaching, and training center based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. We help families flourish one story at a time. Nurture Counseling provides counseling intensive for couples, conflict resolution coaching, story work groups, seminars, workshops, and retreats to provide a safe and welcoming context for exploring the agonizing experiences of pain, brokenness, and evil that disrupt our lives, and that God often uses to nurture deeper trust and intimacy with Him and with each other. You can find us online at www.nurturecounseling.net.